London, 1888. In the heart of the mighty British Empire, beneath the glittering facade of the Victorian era, darkness lurks. In the eastern outskirts, in the labyrinth of narrow streets and poor dwellings of Whitechapel, a horror is born that will grip the city in fear and give rise to one of the most enduring and sinister criminal legends, that of Jack the Ripper. Between April 1888 and February 1891, a series of brutal murders shook Whitechapel, leaving behind a bloody trail and countless unanswered questions. The killer, whose identity remains forever shrouded in mystery, receives the sinister pseudonym Jack the Ripper, a name that still sends shivers down spines and fuels endless speculation. Before the sinister pseudonym appeared in the press, tension already hung heavy in Whitechapel. A series of attacks and murders of women in the spring and summer of 1888, though not all officially attributed to the same perpetrator, created a sense of growing threat and unease among the local population. These early crimes, often brutal and unsolved, served as a grim omen of the horror that was about to unfold. The birth of fear is gradual but all-consuming. Rumors spread quickly through the narrow streets, fueled by the lack of information and the increasing brutality of the attacks. The women of Whitechapel lived in constant fear for their lives, and the police seemed powerless to stop the rising tide of violence. Today we will delve deep into this dark era. We will try to understand the social context that gave rise to this tragedy, to look into the eyes of the victims, to trace the chaotic and often fruitless investigation, and to examine the endless parade of faces that have been suspected of these crimes. Prepare for a journey into the heart of darkness, where the line between historical fact and terrifying legend is often dangerously blurred. Behind the sinister pseudonym Jack the Ripper stand 5 women whose lives were tragically taken in the darkness of Whitechapel. They are not just nameless victims in criminal files, but human beings, each with their own story, their own struggles, and their own lost dreams. Let us try to imagine their world and the tragedy of their fate, so that they are not forgotten as simply a series of horrifying statistics. Marianne Polly Nichols, 43 years old. Her life was marked by hardship, marriage, separation, and a long struggle with alcoholism. Described by acquaintances as a good-natured but vulnerable woman, often seeking solace at the bottom of a glass. On the night of her murder, she was evicted from a lodging house for not having the 4pence for a bed. She was found dead in the early hours of August 31st on Bucks Row. Detailed medical reports describe 2 deep cuts to her throat, reaching the spinal column, as well as deep jagged cuts to her abdomen, exposing her internal organs. Some of these cuts appear to have been made with great force and knowledge of anatomy. Annie Chapman, 47 years old, known by the nickname Dark Annie. Her life was marked by the loss of her husband and child, as well as by the struggle with poverty and alcohol. On September 8th, she was found murdered in the backyard of a house on Hanbury Street. The injuries were even more Zversky. In addition to the slashed throat, her abdomen was cut open, and internal organs, uterus and part of the bladder, were missing, suggesting cold-bloodedness, surgical precision, or at least knowledge of human anatomy and the deliberate removal of organs. Her face was also slightly injured. Elizabeth Stride, 44 years old, a Swedish immigrant. Known by the nickname Long Liz. She had a turbulent life, including marriage and separation, as well as problems with alcohol. She was murdered on Berner Street on September 30th. Her injuries were less extensive than those of the other victims, only a deep cut to her throat severing the carotid artery. This has led to theories that the killer was interrupted during the attack, possibly by a passerby or a patrolling police officer. Catherine Eddowes, 46 years old. Her life was marked by hardship and vagrancy, and she often used different aliases. She was murdered on Mitre Square, also on September 30th, on the night of the double event, just an hour after the murder of Elizabeth Stride. Her injuries were similar to those of Annie Chapman: a slashed throat, a disfigured abdomen with exposed internal organs, and a missing left kidney, as well as her uterus. Her face was also disfigured, with cuts to her nose and eyelids. Part of her kidney was sent with the sinister "From Hell" letter. Mary Jane Kelly. Only 25 years old, the youngest and perhaps the most tragic of all. Her life was marked by prostitution and desperate attempts to survive in the cruel world of Whitechapel. She was murdered in her own room on Dorset Street on November 9th. The murder was the most brutal and extensive of all. Her body was mutilated beyond recognition, with numerous deep cuts all over her body, missing organs, heart, breasts, as well as horrifying facial injuries, suggesting extreme rage, hatred, and possibly a prolonged period spent with the victim after death. These women are more than just victims of a serial killer. They are tragic symbols of the vulnerability, poverty, and social indifference at the heart of Victorian London. Their memory must be preserved, and their humanity acknowledged. The police investigation into the Whitechapel murders was unprecedented in its scale for the time, engaging hundreds of police officers and detectives from Scotland Yard and the local police. However, it was doomed to difficulties due to archaic working methods and the lack of modern forensic technologies. Inspector Frederick Aberline, despite his dedication and efforts, found himself facing an almost insurmountable labyrinth of contradictory and often unreliable witness testimonies, an abundance of false leads, public panic, and increasing media pressure to quickly apprehend the killer. The reliability of witness testimonies was severely compromised by the darkness, fog, poor street lighting, the fear and prejudices of the people, as well as the fact that many of the witnesses were intoxicated or had unclear memories. Descriptions of the alleged killer varied significantly, from a young man to an old one of different heights and clothing, making his identification almost impossible. Often, witnesses reported suspicious individuals based on rumors and their own fears. The collection and analysis of physical evidence were primitive by modern standards. Methods for identifying fingerprints were absent, introduced later. DNA analysis was science fiction for that era, and forensic medicine was in its early stages of development. The police relied mainly on visual inspections of the crime scenes and the conclusions of police surgeons, as well as the collection of clothing and other items found near the victims. The role of police surgeons, such as Dr. Thomas Bond, was crucial. Their autopsies provided valuable information about the cause of death, the suspected murder weapon, and the killer's possible knowledge of anatomy. However, their conclusions were also not always unambiguous, and often relied on assumptions and personal interpretations. Media hysteria and public pressure exerted enormous influence on the investigation, often leading it in the wrong direction, creating an atmosphere of distrust and criticism towards the police, and fueling sensational stories and false confessions. The press often published unverified information and spread panic among the population. The case of Jack the Ripper paradoxically stimulated the development of criminology. The unprecedented difficulty in capturing this elusive killer prompted the police and scientific circles to seek new methods and approaches in crime investigation, which ultimately led to the birth of modern forensic sciences, such as more systematic evidence collection and attempts to profile criminals. Despite all efforts, the police never managed to catch Jack the Ripper, which generated much criticism, conspiracy theories, and a sense of failure of justice, as well as lasting distrust between the local population and the authorities. Over the past century, countless theories have been put forward regarding the identity of Jack the Ripper. each with its supporters and detractors. Let's examine some of the most compelling and debated suspects in more detail. Before we delve deeper into the shadowy figures who became suspects in this terrifying saga, I wanted to take a moment to invite you to explore more chilling tales and unsolved mysteries on my channel, Cold Diaries. If you're captivated by the darkness and the unknown, be sure to subscribe and join our community as we unravel history's most perplexing cases. Now, let's return to the grim reality of Victorian London and the men who fell under suspicion in the hunt for Jack the Ripper. Among the suspects, Aaron Kosminski stands out, a Polish immigrant dwelling in the shadows of Whitechapel. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he was identified as a potential killer by Chief Inspector Donald Swanson. The history of his connection to the case is lengthy, culminating in contemporary DNA analysis of a shawl claimed to have belonged to Catherine Eddowes and bearing traces of his mitochondrial DNA. However, numerous questions and criticisms surround this clue regarding possible contamination, the chain of custody of the evidence, and the very type of DNA, which is not unique. Alternative theories about the shawl's origin also exist. Another shadow in the list of suspects is Montague John Druitt, a barrister burdened by mental health issues. Dismissed from his job shortly before the horrifying end of the murder series, he was found dead, drowned in the waters of the Thames. The chronology of his life, his strange behavior, and the coincidence of his death with the end of the canonical 5 murders made him an early object of suspicion. Nevertheless, direct evidence against him is lacking, and contemporary researchers raise questions about this theory. The name of the renowned painter Walter Sickert also creeps into the dark analyses. His morbid obsession with the case, as well as some of his sinister paintings and the pseudonyms he used, fuel suspicions. Despite the intriguing theory, a direct link to the crimes has never been discovered, and criticisms of this hypothesis are numerous. The conspiracy theory involving Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, also finds its place in the debates. Despite his royal lineage, this hypothesis suffers from serious chronological inconsistencies and a lack of convincing evidence. Last but not least is Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American, a seller of dubious medicines known for his misogyny. His character and the circumstances surrounding his stay in London during the murders make him one of the many suspects. In the fog of the investigation, ghostly letters also appear, claimed to be written by Jack the Ripper himself. Hundreds of messages reach the police and the media, but the authenticity of most of them remains in question. Among them stand out the sinister Dear Boss, Saucy Jackie, and From Hell. The analysis of their language, content, and the details they reveal about the murders is key. Different theories arise about their authorship. Were they truly the work of the killer? Or were they created by sensation-seeking journalists? Or simply by people wanting to mock the authorities? Contemporary linguistic and graphological studies also do not provide a definitive answer about the origin of these terrifying letters. Over time, the image of the real killer blurs and transforms into a myth. Jack the Ripper becomes a symbol of evil, an elusive shadow lurking in the dark streets of London. His story has been retold countless times, often mixed with elements of fiction and sensationalism. How is this myth created, and what is its lasting influence on culture? This is a question that continues to fascinate generations. The story of Jack the Ripper, a terrifying blend of historical fact and chilling legend, serves as a dark mirror reflecting our deepest fears and our enduring fascination with the macabre. His crimes, though confined to a brief period in Victorian London, echo through time, inspiring countless works of fiction, film, and art. The mystery of his identity, the brutality of his acts, and the social context that allowed him to operate continue to fuel our imaginations and our nightmares. If you've been captivated by this chilling tale, be sure to explore more unsolved mysteries and delve into the darkness with me on Cold Diaries. But for now, the fog of Whitechapel remains, and the shadow of Jack the Ripper stretches across the centuries, a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk in the heart of even the most civilized societies.